Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Lights Out, Evil Night Begins, published by Scare Fiction. Reading for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1, The Long Night Ahead. I'm Sarah, a woman of routine and order. My days run by a relentless march of deadlines and responsibilities. As a project manager, I navigate the complex maze of budgets and timelines despite my demanding career, I cherish the moments I spend with my loved ones, finding solace in their presence amid the chaos of everyday life. Their unwavering support fuels my drive for success and compels me to strive for greatness in everything I do. Precision, my quick mind and keen eye for detail, serve me well in the world of corporate affairs. But beyond the confines of the office is a life full of history and complexity. I was raised in a small town by hardworking parents who instilled in me a strong work ethic and sense of integrity. My family, my anchor in the turbulent sea of life, has always been there to support me through the highs and lows. The insistent hum of the approaching deadline vibrated in my skull, a relentless counterpoint to the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of my fingers against the keyboard. Outside, the city lights were just beginning to flicker into existence, painting the inky black canvas of the approaching night. Sarah, I reminded myself, one email at a time. This Goliath of a case wouldn't conquer itself. Titan Tech's corporate headquarters were a monument to sterile efficiency. Glass and steel scraped the sky, a testament to the company's cold, calculating grip on the tech world. I, however, was hunched over a mountain of paperwork in a cubicle the size of a walk-in closet. The air thick with the stale scent of recycled paper and stale ambition. The rest of the office had emptied out hours ago. The steady stream of chatter and clatter had given way to an unsettling silence, broken only by the muffled whir of the ventilation system. Even the cleaning crew, usually a comforting constant in the late hours, had vanished, leaving me adrift in a sea of deserted desks and flickering computer screens. An unsettling prickle crawled up my spine as I glanced around the deserted office. The sterile walls seemed to press in closer, the silence amplifying the hum of the fluorescent lights into a menacing drone. Just nerves, I chided myself. The pressure of the case was getting to me. Needing a distraction, I reached for my phone, the familiar glow, a small comfort in the vast emptiness. A notification popped up, an email from an unknown sender. Frowning, I clicked it open. There was no subject line, just a single sentence in stark black font. Leave now, Sarah. It's not safe. My breath hitched. It was a spam address, obviously, some kind of phishing attempt. But the email felt different, intrusive. An icy hand clamped around my heart, squeezing the remnants of my bravado. I deleted the email, telling myself it was nothing, just another glitch in the corporate machine. Minutes later, another email arrived, the same stark message staring back at me. Panic gnawed at the edges of my composure. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was trying to scare me, but who and why? My initial instinct was to call security, but the sheer absurdity of it all kept me rooted in my chair. Who would send cryptic messages to a corporate lawyer? A third email arrived with a chilling attachment, a single grainy image of the deserted office building, the lights eerily extinguished, the Titan Tech logo a menacing silhouette against the night sky. The caption below sent a jolt through me. They're gone, Sarah. Now, it's your turn. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, then plunged the room into darkness. My scream died in my throat, swallowed by the suffocating silence. In that moment, The sterile office transformed into a tomb, the walls closing in, the shadows taking on menacing shapes. The knot of dread in my stomach tightened, a cold certainty replacing the initial fear. This wasn't a prank. Someone was here, and they wanted me gone. But why? The answer, as chilling as the darkness itself, remained a horrifying mystery. Chapter 2. Flickering lights and unsettling sounds. The darkness wasn't absolute. An occasional flicker from a dying fluorescent bulb cast grotesque shadows that danced across the sterile walls. Each flicker brought a jolt of adrenaline, my heart hammering a frantic tattoo against my ribs. The silence, once suffocating, was now shattered by a cacophony of unsettling sounds. Muffled thumps echoed from the hallway, punctuated by the eerie scrape of something metallic dragging across the floor. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a power outage. This was something far more sinister. Scrambling for my phone, I fumbled to dial security. My fingers, slick with sweat, punched in the emergency number. The dial tone, usually a comforting hum in tense situations, now felt like a death knell. Static, nothing. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot, a cocktail of fear and morbid curiosity keeping me frozen. A sudden tremor shook the building, sending a shower of dust cascading down from the ceiling tiles. My breath caught in my throat. A scream, raw and primal, threatened to erupt from my lips. Just then, the office door creaked open, a shaft of light briefly cutting through the gloom. Relief washed over me. A tidal wave threatened to sweep away the terror. "David," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. David, a coworker known for his late-night coding sessions, stood framed in the doorway. Relief morphed into a cautious hope. David, usually a wiry bundle of nervous energy, seemed oddly calm. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice a touch too casual. "Power's out, huh? Crazy stuff." He stepped into the room, the sliver of light from the hallway vanishing behind him. The shadows seemed to coalesce around him, his features obscured by the darkness. "Yeah," I stammered, my voice regaining a semblance of normalcy. "I was just trying to call security, but the lines are dead." David shrugged, the movement broad and exaggerated in the dim light. "Probably overloaded circuits. Happens sometimes." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the overturned chair next to my desk. "Looks like you had a rough night." "Just a deadline looming," I said, forcing a smile. The silence returned, thicker and more oppressive than before. The scraping sound echoed again, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. David's hand darted to his pocket, but emerged empty. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. David frowned. "Hear what?" His voice lacked conviction, a tremor of fear barely disguised. The growl came again, closer still, and a sickening metallic clang resonated from somewhere deep within the building. This wasn't a prank, and it wasn't a power outage. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. We were trapped, and whatever lurked in the darkness was getting closer. The false sense of security David offered had evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal terror that threatened to consume me whole. Chapter 3. A descent into darkness. The metallic clang echoed again, this time closer, followed by a low moan that vibrated through the floorboards. The flimsy office chair next to my desk tipped over with a crash, sending a jolt of terror through me. David flinched, his face pale in the faint glow emanating from his phone screen. The flickering light cast grotesque shadows that danced across his features, momentarily morphing him into a monstrous caricature of himself. My scream died in my throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. The darkness in the office, was no longer punctuated by brief flashes of light. The final flicker died, plunging us into utter blackness. Panic clawed at my throat, constricting my airways. I fumbled in my purse, desperate for any source of light. Relief flooded me as my fingers brushed against the familiar cool metal of my keychain flashlight. With trembling hands, I snapped it on, the weak beam cutting a thin swath through the suffocating darkness. David let out a relieved sigh. Finally, some light. The sound of his voice, surprisingly steady, offered a sliver of comfort in the suffocating gloom. We huddled together, the narrow beam from my flashlight our only guide as we cautiously stepped out of the cubicle. "Where are we going?" I whispered, my voice barely above a terrified squeak. "There's an emergency exit at the end of the hall. Maybe we can get out through there," David said, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation. We navigated the deserted hallway, the silence broken only by the rasp of our hurried breaths and the occasional creak of the floorboards underfoot. Each step felt amplified in the darkness, the shadows taking on menacing shapes that sent shivers down my spine. "Did you see that?" David hissed, his voice tight with sudden fear. My heart stuttered. "See what?" I whispered back, my grip tightening on the flashlight. David pointed down the hallway. "A figure." It moved. I squinted into the darkness, strained my eyes, but saw nothing. But the seed of doubt was sown. Was it just my imagination, or did something truly dark past us in the inky blackness? As we continued down the hallway, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled, and David caught my arm. The world tilted, the hallway stretching and distorting before my eyes. In that disorienting moment, I swear I saw faces staring out from the darkness, grotesque masks of terror contorted in silent screams. David's voice, heavy with concern, pulled me back from the brink. "Sarah, are you okay?" I blinked rapidly, the faces dissolving back into the shadows. "Yeah," I croaked, forcing a shaky smile. "Just a little disoriented." David frowned, his brow creased with worry. "Maybe it's the lack of oxygen," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "These sealed buildings can get stuffy after a while." But a flicker of doubt crossed his face, a flicker that mirrored my own growing unease. The darkness seemed to press in on us, heavy and oppressive. We were no longer just navigating the physical darkness. Something else lurked here, a malevolent presence that toyed with our minds, feeding our fears. Suddenly, David stopped short, his hand clamped over my mouth. A low, guttural growl echoed through the hallway, chillingly close. We exchanged a terrified glance, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. What have we gotten ourselves into? Chapter 4. Uncovering the Past. The growl hung in the air, a suffocating presence that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. David's grip on my arm tightened, his knuckles white in the faint beam of my flashlight. We stood frozen, breath held captive in our lungs, straining to hear any further sound. The silence that followed was almost worse. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity, each tick of my internal clock, a hammer blow against my already shattered nerves. Finally, David cleared his throat, the sound rasping and unnatural in the oppressive darkness. "We need to keep moving," he whispered, his voice tight with barely suppressed fear. We inched forward, the hallway seeming to stretch on endlessly. Then, just as despair threatened to consume me, David's hand brushed against a rough surface. "Here," he murmured, relief lacing his voice. It was a doorway, barely noticeable in the darkness, hidden behind a heavy tapestry depicting a scene from some forgotten myth. With trembling hands, David pushed the door open. It creaked on rusty hinges, revealing a narrow, dusty room. We cautiously stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing stacks of file cabinets and a large oak desk piled high with papers. A thrill of morbid curiosity shot through me. This could be the answer we were looking for, some explanation for the horrors that had unfolded this night. David found a desk lamp, its aged brass base tarnished with time. He plugged it into a dusty outlet, and with a flicker, the room was bathed in a warm, golden glow. We huddled around the desk, sifting through the papers. They were brittle and yellowed with age, some covered in cryptic symbols and indecipherable scribbles. Others, however, were more clear employee records, missing person reports, all centered around this very building. Each report detailed the disappearance of a late-night worker, their cases shrouded in bizarre circumstances and ultimately left unsolved. A chill snaked down my spine as I flipped through the files. This wasn't just a building with a faulty electrical system. There was something far more sinister at play. Then, a file tucked away in a corner drawer caught my eye. Its cover was simple, just a single word scrawled in bold letteru. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened it, the contents sending a jolt of icy fear through me. The document spoke of a dark ceremony conducted on the very spot where this building now stood. A ritual meant to appease an ancient entity. But something went wrong. The entity, it seemed, wasn't appeased. Instead, it was awakened. A sudden flicker of light pulled me from my morbid fascination with the file. We looked up to see David staring in horror at his laptop screen. The screen flashed with an onslaught of corrupted images, distorted faces, contorted in silent screams, symbols echoing those found in the ancient document. Then, in a harsh, distorted voice, a single word boomed through the room. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the temperature dropping several degrees in an instant. Terror coiled in my gut, a constricting serpent tightening its grip. We weren't alone in this room, and whatever lurked here, it was no longer content with the shadows. The hunt had begun. Chapter 5, The Isolation Game. The disembodied voice echoed through the room, a chilling taunt that sent shivers down my spine. The air grew colder, a palpable presence settling over us like a suffocating shroud. David slammed his laptop shut, his face pale and drawn. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, his voice strained. He grabbed a crowbar from a rack mounted on the wall, its presence a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the room. But something about David had changed. His eyes, usually filled with nervous energy, now held a flicker of something else, a cold glint that sent a wave of unease washing over me. Was he a victim in all this, or was there something more sinister at play? The question lingered unanswered as we burst out of the hidden room, the sterile hallway, a stark contrast to the dusty haven we had just left. We sprinted down the corridor, the silence broken only by the pounding of our feet and the ragged gasps for breath. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered wildly, then plunged the hallway into complete darkness. I stumbled, crashing into David. Panic clawed at my throat as I reached out for him, but found only empty air. "David," I called out, my voice trembling in the darkness. Silence. Then, a faint giggle echoed down the hallway, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. This wasn't a prank, and it wasn't a power outage. This was the entity, toying with us, playing a twisted game of isolation. Desperate for any source of light, I fumbled for my phone, the familiar glow a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. But as I unlocked the screen, a wave of nausea washed over me. The wallpaper image was gone, replaced by a single word scrawled in a menacing font, "Alone." With a choked sob, I shoved the phone back in my pocket. I was truly alone, adrift in a sea of darkness, preyed upon by an unseen entity. The ventilation system above, groaned to life, a cacophony of whirring and clanging that grated on my already frayed nerves. A gust of icy air blew past me, carrying with it the faint scent of sulfur and decay. The building itself seemed to be conspiring against me. Every door I tried to open was locked, the electronic locks emitting a mocking buzz. The entity was hurting me, driving me deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, away from any hope of escape. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision further. I was lost, utterly helpless. Then, in the distance, I heard a muffled scream. David? Was he out there too, lost and terrified? Or was this another trick, another cruel game played by the entity? Taking a deep breath, I steeled my nerves and pushed forward, the faint scream guiding my way. But with every step, the air grew colder, the darkness thicker, and the oppressive weight of fear threatened to consume me whole. Chapter 6: Confrontation with Fear. The muffled scream echoed again, closer this time, pulling me deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. Hope battled with fear in my chest. Was it David, or another cruel illusion conjured by the entity? Rounding a corner, I stumbled upon a flickering emergency light, its weak glow illuminating a scene that froze the blood in my veins. David stood cowering in the corner, his face contorted in terror, his eyes locked on a spectral figure hovering before him. It was translucent, a wisp of darkness, taking the shape of a tall woman with a skeletal frame and eyes that burned like embers. "Mom?" David's voice cracked, a mix of fear and longing. The figure raised a skeletal hand, its touch sending shivers down my spine, even from a distance. "You failed me, David," it rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You disappointed me." David crumpled to the floor, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Instinct screamed at me to flee, to save myself. But something held me rooted to the spot. The entity's power seemed to feed on David's fear, growing stronger with every whimper, every sob. "David," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's not real. Don't let it control you." He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "But it is," he choked out. "She's always with me." Suddenly, a memory flashed before my eyes, a crowded conference room, an expectant audience, and me frozen at the podium, my carefully prepared presentation abandoned in the face of crippling stage fright. A wave of shame washed over me. That had been my deepest fear, a dark entity that had almost derailed my career. An idea, a desperate gamble, sparked in my mind. I fumbled in my purse, pulling out a crumpled folder I hadn't touched in years, the abandoned presentation that symbolized my greatest fear. Unfolding it, I held it out to David. "This," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word, "this is what held me back. But I won't let fear control me anymore." David stared at the folder, then back at me, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. Slowly, he took the folder, his hands shaking. As he started flipping through the pages, the spectral figure before him wavered, its form distorting, its whispers turning into frustrated shrieks. The entity's power was waning, its hold over David weakening with every step he took towards confronting his fear. Drawing a deep breath, David looked up at me, a newfound resolve in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah." With that, he turned his back on the spectral figure and began talking, his voice initially shaky but gaining strength with each sentence. He spoke of his regrets, of his unaddressed resentment towards his mother, and of his determination to move forward. As David spoke, the entity in the corner dissolved into wisps of darkness, its hold on the building broken. The flicker of the emergency light grew brighter, pushing back the shadows. The faint hum of the ventilation system returned, a comforting sound in the aftermath of the terror. We may not have escaped the building yet, but the entity's stranglehold was broken. We had faced our deepest fears, and in doing so, found a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Chapter 7: A Choice of Paths. The spectral figure writhed in the dim light, its form flickering like a dying flame. David's raw honesty, his voice thick with emotion, seemed to be its undoing. With each word, the entity's grip on the building loosened, the oppressive atmosphere slowly lifting. Empowered by this shift, I stepped forward. Years of carefully crafted arguments and statistics swam before my eyes, but this time they weren't directed at a boardroom full of investors. This time, my audience was an entity fueled by darkness and fear. My voice, initially shaky, firmed with resolve. I spoke of the power fear wielded, how it could cripple even the most determined spirit. I spoke of my own struggle, of facing my fear head-on and emerging stronger. The room echoed, not with silence, but with the entity's desperate shrieks, a chorus of disapproval as I chipped away at its power. David joined me, his voice gaining strength with every sentence. He spoke of his regrets, of the choices he'd made that had fueled the entity's influence. He spoke of forgiveness and of moving forward, his words echoing in the vast emptiness. As we spoke, a memory flickered in my mind, a dog-eared blueprint David had pulled from the hidden room. It depicted the entire building layout, including a section labeled Restricted Access Control Panel. Hope surged through me. Could this be the key to banishing the entity for good? Hurriedly, I recounted the memory to David. His eyes widened in recognition. The blueprints, they might hold the answer. We sprinted back to the hidden room, the echo of our footsteps, the only sound in the now quiet building. David rummaged through the dusty files until he found the blueprint, his hand shaking with anticipation. There, in the restricted access section, a small control panel was marked. 2 buttons were prominently displayed: banish and escape. We exchanged a glance, the weight of the decision settling on our shoulders. Banishing the entity meant facing it head-on, a fight we weren't sure we could win. But escaping meant leaving countless others vulnerable to its influence. The silence stretched on as we grappled with the weight of our choice. Finally, David broke the silence, his voice firm. "We can't run forever, Sarah. We have to face this thing." I met his gaze, a newfound determination reflected in his eyes. We were no longer just victims. We were the ones taking control. With a deep breath, I reached out and pressed the banish button. A blinding white light filled the room, and the world went silent. Chapter 8: The Uncertain Dawn. The blinding white light receded, leaving me blinking in the sudden darkness. Disoriented, I fumbled for David's hand, finding it clammy and cold. We stood there in silence, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt electronics. A flicker of light, then another. Slowly, the fluorescent bulbs flickered back to life, revealing a scene of devastation. Papers littered the floor, scorched and blackened. Furniture lay overturned, victims of the unseen battle that had just transpired. "Did we do it?" David's voice echoed in the now silent room, a tremor of uncertainty lacing his words. I looked at him, his face pale and drawn, mirroring my own feelings. We had banished the entity, that much was clear, but a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Was the threat truly gone, or had we merely driven it back into the shadows, waiting for an opportune moment to return? A faint hum resonated through the building, barely audible, but sending shivers down my spine. It was a sound I couldn't place, a low, constant thrumming that seemed to vibrate in the very walls. Was it just the aftermath of the energy surge, or a chilling reminder of the entity's lingering presence? We stumbled out of the hidden room, the weight of the experience heavy on our shoulders. The first tendrils of dawn painted the sky a pale gray, and as we emerged from the building, a wave of relief washed over me. Fresh air filled my lungs, the sight of the familiar city skyline a welcome comfort. But the relief was short-lived. As we gazed around, a subtle unease settled in my gut. The city, usually bustling with activity at this hour, seemed eerily quiet. A lone crow cawed overhead, its harsh cry echoing in the deserted streets. "Something's not right," David muttered, his voice laced with a newfound suspicion. The faint hum seemed to intensify, pulsing through the very air itself. Then, a distant flicker of movement caught my eye. On a rooftop, across the street, a shadowy figure emerged, its form twisting and contorting in the dim light. Before I could scream, a blood-curdling shriek ripped through the air. The entity, a towering mass of inky blackness, stretched its shadowy arms towards us. It was a grotesque amalgamation of our deepest fears, a monstrous reflection of the darkness we had just confronted. Panic surged through me, robbing me of breath. Without a word, David grabbed my hand and we bolted. We weaved through deserted streets, the entity's booming laughter echoing behind us. Its shadowy form seemed to flow across rooftops, keeping pace with our frantic escape. Just as despair threatened to consume me, a flicker of light pierced the gloom. Nestled on a forgotten street corner was a small bookstore, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. A beacon of hope in the midst of the growing darkness. With a burst of adrenaline, we burst through the bookstore's doors, the bell above jingling wildly. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile stood behind the counter. "Welcome," she said, her voice a soothing balm to our frayed nerves. "You look like you could use a cup of tea." We collapsed onto the nearest chairs, gasping for breath. The entity hesitated at the doorway, its form wavering in the light emanating from the countless books lining the shelves. It let out a frustrated roar, but seemed powerless to enter. As we sipped the steaming tea, the woman explained the bookstore served as a sanctuary, its walls holding knowledge that repelled entities like the one we had faced. She spoke of the power of knowledge and the importance of facing fears together. The night passed in a blur of whispered stories and frantic research. We pored over ancient texts, learning about the entity's weaknesses and the importance of staying informed. By sunrise, exhaustion had settled in, but a newfound resolve burned bright in our eyes. We stepped out of the bookstore at dawn, blinking in the sunlight. The city was back to its usual rhythm, the threat seemingly abated. But we knew the entity might return, and this time we would be ready. We had each other and the knowledge gleaned from the countless stories held within the bookstore walls. The faint black mist clinging to the very edges of the bookstore's light was a chilling reminder of the entity's potential return. But for now, we stood together, a testament to the power of courage and the unwavering pursuit of knowledge.